Hello everyone, I'm bringing you the Mannequin of the Month for December 2023 today, and what we're talking about in this video is the kit for Sapper in the Royal Engineers serving in Aden in 1967. This topic of choice was chosen via a poll over on Patreon. The corporal tier get to vote each month on what's going to be covered in Mannequin of the Month. There are generally 3 options, so if you'd be interested in taking a look at that, Patreon is linked down below in the description. Now, in Aden in 1967, of course, you have the ongoing Aden emergency, and this resulted from Britain's efforts to prepare the colony for independence. Britain had already decided to leave the British forces. The military base was no longer required. Aden had been developed as something of a coaling station back when the Navy was coal-fired, and had then developed into a thriving commercial port. And beyond that, of course, you had the protectorates up in the hinterland, up in the hills. And the whole situation was very strange, very backward. There were various independence movements who were very keen to be seen to be pushing the British out in the late 60s, even though Britain had already decided to withdraw. You have the infamous situation in Crater with the Argylls, all very interesting. Not particularly looking at the history of what was going on at the time, have a look at the kit, but it's interesting to just know a little bit of background of obviously public order duties were being carried on, and not only by infantry, by corps troops as well. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at a Royal Engineer, a Sapper of the Royal Engineers, and that's why I put this as one of the options on Patreon for people to consider, and it's the one that's topped the poll. So what we have on the Mannequin here is tropical kit, suitable for obviously the very arid conditions in Aden, and we have limited web equipment and so forth necessary for those sort of public order duties, similar to what would be seen in Northern Ireland, of course, in only a couple of years' time. But starting at the top, we'll talk about headgear first. We have here the midnight blue beret, which of course had been introduced in the very late 1940s, and it's a fairly standard headdress at this time. There are certain regiments who use different coloured berets as well, but the midnight blue was very common amongst corps troops and infantry regiments in the British Army at the time. And you of course have the Royal Engineers anodised cap badge there with the Elizabeth II cipher and the crown at the top there, the St Edward's crown. So the Royal Engineers cap badge there, marking out that this is a Sapper in the Royal Engineers rather than infantry troops. So, as I say, there are photographs of Sappers of the Royal Engineers, of units of the Royal Engineers engaged on public order duties in Aden, and some other corps troops as well. The Royal Corps of Transport were dragged in to some degree as well. So it's quite interesting taking a look at photos of those troops involved in operations at the time. The basic uniform is the 1950 pattern khaki uniform. So you have a cellular, or Airtex to use the trade name for this sort of material. You have a cellular bush jacket here, which is actually worn tucked in as a shirt. In this instance, we have the drill trousers. You do see shorts worn as well, so a mix match there. Depending on unit, there's quite a range of clothing that was worn in Aden. You see some jungle green items of clothing, olive drab clothing worn, shirts, wool shirts were worn as well to some degree. But in this instance, we do have the matching khaki bush jacket and trousers, the 1950 pattern there. And of course, these were produced in green as well for use in jungle conditions. We have the khaki version of that uniform here, something we've talked about on the channel previously. The web equipment is 1958 pattern. Certainly by the late 1960s, there'd been a gradual change, of course, from 1937 pattern to 1958 pattern, and 37 pattern would still show up in certain units for some time to come. The catering corps, for example, there are photographs into the early 80s showing catering corps using 1937 pattern in certain instances, but certainly 1958 pattern was dominant in the army by this point. We have on the left hip here a single ammunition pouch, and this is one of the first issue ammunition pouches. By 1967, of course, both the second issue version of this and indeed the third issue, the enlarged version, were both in production, both on issue, but it's still common to see first issue components in use at the time. Of course, it's a pouch, there's nothing wrong with it. It carries magazines perfectly well, so that's included on here, one of the first issue pouches. Standard belt, as you can see there, nothing really to talk about there. We talked about the 1958 pattern on the channel quite a bit, and it's just a standard web belt there. And round on the right hip, you have the water bottle pouch there, moved forward on the hip so it's easy to access. And of course, in there you have the plastic 1958 pattern water bottle and the cup nested together. It's a first issue version of the pouch, which of course arrived a little bit after the rest of the equipment had been introduced. It's a tight fit for the bottle. You can probably see the cup just poking out at the side there, not really sized very well for the bottle, which was one of the issues with the initial issue of water bottle pouches. It was somewhat improved with the second issue, which of course closed with a strap and buckle. We'll see more of that, and we'll talk more about that as we move this round. That's the front of the Mannequin. We'll start moving this round now and have a look at some of the other details. Moving on to look at the right hand side of the Mannequin here, we can talk a little bit more about the water bottle and the pouch. Obviously we have both the water bottle and the cup nested together in there. This is the first issue version of the water bottle pouch. Both the bottle and the pouch didn't appear with the initial issue of 1958 pattern. It was 1962. It took a little bit of time to work out exactly what sort of bottle was going to be used with 1958 pattern. We've had a look at some of the trials items and so forth on the channel previously. So, as I say, we have the first issue water bottle pouch here. Unlike the second issue, this closes with a twist lock fastener, the front here, and it's quite a tight fit for the bottle and cup. The second version of this would improve on that, close with a strap and buckle, and just be slightly larger to accommodate the bottle and the cup a little bit more easily. Other than that, you can see the epaulette on the shoulder of the bush jacket there, obviously sleeves rolled up, not particularly neatly. I always find it difficult on the mannequin when there aren't arms to roll the sleeve up against. It tends to sag down like this, but it would be neatly rolled up, of course, in practice. And as I say, you've got the web equipment there. You can see round on the back of the belt the respirator haversack, which is carried in this instance, which we'll have a look at in a bit more detail now. One thing to mention with the bush jacket as well is this is worn tucked in as a shirt. You can see the half belt at the back here, which is actually stitched in place. You can perhaps see the seam of that running round there. Originally, this would have had belts coming round the front with a two-pronged buckle. That's actually been cut off and removed from this particular jacket to allow it to be worn as a shirt more comfortably, as we see here. On the back of the belt, we have the haversack for the light anti-gas respirator. These were quite commonly carried in Aden, not universally, it depended on exactly what was going on at the time, but obviously if anti-riot agents were to be used, then the troops involved would need gas protection, and therefore a respirator would be carried. And the light anti-gas respirator was still very much the mainstay at the time. The S6 was being introduced, but the light anti-gas respirator was definitely the common respirator carried and used in Aden at the time. Perfectly fine against anti-riot agents, of course. So you have that carried on the back of the belt in its haversack here, clipped on. You see these carried in various different ways, sometimes slung from the shoulder strap, other times attached to the belt, sometimes facing the other way. It just really varies from person to person. It can even vary within a unit, a single photograph of one unit. The way the haversack is carried can vary greatly. The shoulder strap is removable from these, but in this instance it's just been tucked away inside. It's still attached to the rings, and sometimes you see them just dangling down. They've not bothered to even tuck them out of the way, sometimes wrapped around the body of the respirator haversack as well. So as I say, lots of variation there, and this is just one way of doing it, carrying it on the back of the belt like this. Of course, from here it's not that difficult to reach around, open the quick release and withdraw the respirator if required. So that's the back of the mannequin. We'll move this round now and have a look at the left-hand side. Looking at the left-hand side, the first thing I'll mention here is you'll note no bayonet is carried. Bayonets were often carried in Aden, but not universally, so I've chosen to omit that there. We don't have the bayonet carried on the side of the ammunition pouch, and obviously certain troops would not carry them, depending on the weapon used as well. You can see round on the belt here, a very common feature for troops serving in Aden is the inclusion of a dressing, a shell dressing or a field dressing, taped onto the belt, and this is very common in various different positions, sometimes round on the front of the belt, sometimes right at the back, sometimes round on the hip like this. It really does vary again from soldier to soldier. In photos it varies even within a single unit, so lots of variation there, and in this instance it's taped onto the belt round on the hip here. And this is a Second War era first field dressing, which of course contains two small dressings within. You do sometimes see shell dressings used as well. So I say quite a bit of variety there, and just one example of that replicated on the mannequin here. So I do hope you found it interesting looking at this. If you'd like to know more about what was going on in Aden at the time, a bit more of the background to this, I can highly recommend the documentary series End of Empire, and there's an episode in that dealing with the Aden emergency, and I'll put a link to that in a card here in the video. If you'd like to go and see, I'd say it gives a lot more background to this, and it's quite a broad picture of what was going on. There are other documentaries out there dealing more with what was going on in Crater, the Argyll's deployment to Crater and so forth, which is what most people remember. There are documentaries dealing with that, but the End of Empire episode deals more generally with the background to what happened and then how it was dealt with and so forth. So very interesting from that point of view. Highly recommend going and having a look at that. I thought it'd be interesting in this video to deal with corps troops, and that's why I put that option on Patreon, as I say, and talking about the Royal Engineers being involved out there, and other corps troops are involved as well, not only infantry. So I thought it would be interesting to bring that in. Other than that, the kit we've looked at here, we've kind of covered on the channel previously in other videos talking about Aden. Obviously, in terms of belt kit and so forth, there were variations, but it tended to be stripped down like this with a dressing carried and various other details. We have seen this previously on the channel, but this allows me to sort of set it up a little bit differently from what we've looked at before and include some other details. So hopefully from that point of view, it's been interesting. I've certainly enjoyed making this video, and it's nice to have something a bit different on the mannequin for a change. So always is interesting having kit on the Mannequin from this period. I say the 60s is a particular area of interest for me, so it's nice to have this set up like this for the moment. I do hope you found it interesting, as I say. If you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below, and there will of course be photographs of this posted up over there as well. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down in the description as well. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.